like to welcome Dr. Srinivas Tilak ji. Dr. Srinivas Tilak is a PhD in History of Religions, McGill University, Montreal, Canada. He has taught courses related to India and Hinduism in Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. His publications include The Myth of Sarvodaya, a study in Vinoba's concept, Religion and Aging in the Indian Tradition, Understanding Karma in Light of Paul Ricoeur's Philosophical Anthropology and Hermeneutics, Charleston. So I would now like to welcome Dr. Srinivas Tilak for his talk.
Topic for my paper is Professor Sheldon Pollock on History in India, a critique from the perspective of Mimamsa. Indologists usually claim that India has had no religion, philosophy, science, ethics or history. I think Swadeshi Indology, our response to this claim should be that India has always had dharma, darshana, shastra, niti and itihāsa. And each of these 5 categories are more encompassing and comprehensive than the corresponding category listed by Indologists. This is the basic idea. And then Professor Pollock, he concentrates on that history category, and he, two or three of his many influential articles, he says that ancient India has had no history, that there was what he accepts itihāsa in ancient times, but later on Mimamsa thinkers and scholars suppressed it for their own reasons in their debates and discussions with Buddhists. In order to protect Vedic position, they made the Vedas timeless and authorless. So that is Sheldon Pollock's argument. So my point is that Indians need to explain to the world what itihāsa is, rather than engaging in vain attempts to prove that India had or has history. So I think our discussion should be on what itihāsa is. Professor Pollock claims that by declaring Vedas authorless and timeless, apaurushaya, Mimamsa initiated what he calls the process of Vedicization, which deprived Indic thought systems of history. And consequently, there are 5 or 6 points that I have summarized, because in the afternoon session there are going to be more detailed discussions of what Purva is and how what Pollock's argument is. So I will just mention 5 or 6 conclusions that Professor Pollock draws from his argument that ancient India had no history and that Mimamsa scholars Vedicized and suppressed history. So because of this stance of Mimamsa, Indic thought was emptied of historical consciousness and referentiality. Second point he makes is, modes of cultural, political and social domination were legitimated as a consequence. Third point is, caste hierarchy, untouchability and female heteronomy, meaning loss of autonomy, were promoted as a result of this action on the part of the Mimamsakas. Number 4, Sanskritic culture was deprived of historical referentiality. There is no reference, Professor Pollock argues, to a single actual, real in time, person, place or event in India's past. Number 5, Indic intellectual texts cannot reveal when anything of importance exactly happened, what came prior and what later. There was no history in ancient period. Point 6, Indic's cyclic concept of time negated distinction between myth and history, rendering Indic mode of discourse essentially mythic. These are his conclusions, his argument, and I think in the afternoon sessions many of the speakers will develop further that argument, defense or answer to that arguments made by Professor Pollock. Now, by way of Uttar Paksha, I would suggest that rather than suppressing history, Mimamsa writers, thinkers sustain itihāsa. That would be my Uttar Paksha by way of arguing, replying to Professor Pollock. Professor Pollock does not want readers to know that he operates from an etic or an outsider's perspective. He doesn't caution the reader what his perspective, what his approach is, which is essentially from an outsider's perspective, to say that there was no history in ancient India. With his slogan that ancient India was without history, Professor Pollock perpetrates violence against itihāsa by reducing itihāsa to his understanding of what history is. Swadeshi Indology, on the other hand, I will argue that it operates from an emic or an insider's perspective, meaning using indigenous arguments and theories developed essentially from India, within India, and working on that basis. And that history, what Professor Pollock understands by history, is only one part of the itihāsa, broad comprehensive itihāsa category, and I am suggesting that component from Mimamsa known as Bhutartha perhaps comes closest to Western understanding of what history is. Now, what Bhutartha is, I think in Mimamsa texts, example given is that of a statement like Indra lifted Vajra. Now, this is a statement that we cannot dispute or challenge, and I thought in some way it resembles the historian's claim that when you write history, it has to be proper and it must be properly defended, that nobody can take objection and overrule on it. So, I am suggesting that Bhutarthavada might be a component, equivalent component of itihāsa that is equivalent to history, and perhaps today or later on in the afternoon session, scholars will develop this theme further. Now, Indian tradition from within the emic or within the Indian perspective, itihāsa is traditionally understood as itihāsa, thus it was said. That is the definition, and I am suggesting that we could understand itihāsa in two modalities, as apaurushaya and paurushaya. And these two modalities respectively correspond to cyclical and linear modality. That way we might get away with Pollock's objection that there is no distinction between history and myth, because myth is cyclic and history is linear and so on. So, that is my suggestion that itihāsa may be understood as apaurushaya and paurushaya. Now, what does apaurushaya itihāsa do? In Indian tradition, apaurushaya itihāsa discusses, for example, Yaska's Aitihasic school of interpretation, Aitihasic school, and there Yaska suggests that the role of what I am calling apaurushaya itihāsa is to connect a given Rigvedic mantra with its devata. Each mantra comes with a devata, and providing further explanation of to that mantra and what is the relation of that devata with that mantra is part of itihāsa. Second, explain some of the obscure Samvada Suktas in Rigveda. by offering key to some of the akhyans and samvad that a given sukta may refer to, and then the itihāsa provides more information material to make meaning of that samada sukta more acceptable or more understandable. Provide extended genealogies and biographical pedigrees of rishis who compose a given sukta, or even devatas. So in that sense, this component comes to close to what itihāsa or history is, that providing dynasties and rules and so on and so on. So here we have in Apaurusheya form pedigree and biographical details of rishis. So that is the purpose of Apaurusheya itihāsa. And then mediate between what yesterday's discussion we had, paramarthika dimension and vyavahara. That Professor Pollock says that Vedas have only paramarthik dimension, there is no vyavahara or laukika dimension. But from within the perspective, within the Indian tradition, the argument is that itihāsa includes both. It caters to lokottara or paramarthika dimension in the Veda, and also other material, other literature in Indian tradition where it treats with the laukika dimension. So that is the purpose of these two fold itihāsa, Apaurusheya and Paurusheya. Now Kautilya in his Arthashastra consigns Purana, Itivritta, Akhyayika, Udaharan and even Dharma Shastra to what I say is Paurusheya dimension of itihāsa. So you can see how broad itihāsa as a category is and how it would be reductionist to reduce it to history rather than keeping it as itihāsa, and then we need to explain to the world what itihāsa is. Now itihāsa is not written like history. My understanding is that those who deal with itihāsa, they compile narratives or retell a past event or past narrative. So itihāsa is not written, it is compiled or retold. And it is usually by providing a context, and in narration includes selfless, individual and collective heroic actions. So that is the purpose of itihāsa. Main purpose of itihāsa is to provide individual and collective heroic actions that people remember even thousands of years after. And that is the main purpose of role of itihāsa. Role of itihāsa is to make also available Vedic ethical and spiritual teachings to the masses through the process we call Vedopa Brahmana. So this process of Vedopa Brahmana is exactly opposite of what Professor Pollock called Vedicization. So we need to show this contrast between Professor Pollock's understanding of Vedicization and from within the tradition emic perspective, Vedopa Brahmana, itihāsa Puranabhyam Vedartham Sam Upabrahmayet. That is the teaching that using itihāsa and Puran, Veda, meaning of Veda, spiritual and ethical teachings, they should be made available to succeeding generations. Now, Mimamsakas explain yajna as both kratvartha and purushartha. Professor Pollock himself recognizes that it was the Mimamsakas who introduced the category of purushartha. Now, he doesn't provide the reference for this, and I would like to know from Mimamsa scholars if there is any direct such reference where the category of purushartha is recognized, and then purpose of Mimamsa is to show that there is connection between kratvartha or yajna as it is explained in the Vedic text and purushartha, that every individual, every human, every Indian is supposed to undertake and fulfill. So Mimamsa hermeneutics extended role of itihāsa through what may be understood as arthavad. Now traditionally arthavad is explained as simple glorification, but I think it is more than glorification. It also includes making available more information about a given sukta or richa so that it can be understandable. So this extension of meaning is provided through Arthavada, and Arthavada itself is made up of three categories: Anuvada, Gunavada and Bhutarthavada. Now Anuvad is, the traditional explanation is Anuvad is something like example of fire burns. So that we already know experientially fire burns, but it is reiterated and that is known as Anuvada. So reiterating a given Vedic statement in part is called Anuvada. Second part is Gunavada, meaning enhancing the quality and meaning of that given sukta. For instance, using a metaphor, I suggest that comparing it with something else and metaphorically, then you make it more understandable. And then Bhutarthavada I discussed before, using a statement that cannot be disputed. So these are the three categories that Mimamsakas use and which those who compile itihāsa may use in their preparation, compilation of itihāsa texts. Now I suggest that how Mimamsa principles of hermeneutics were used by various scholars in Indian history, and by way of illustration I think I will take the example of Nilakantha Chaturdhara, a 17th century scholar who lived in Varanasi and was a scholar of Vedanta also, and Mimamsa and other darshanas. He also wrote only surviving commentary on the Mahabharata, Bhavartha Deepika, which is also very influential. So Mantra Ramayana, he wrote a text called, compiled a text called Mantra Ramayana, Nilakantha, where he applies these Mimamsa principles listed above to contextualize Vedic teachings with spiritual aspirations of Indians of his time. So he used Mimamsa categories to bring Vedic teachings from the ancient times to people of his own time by using itihāsa and also Mimamsa categories. So he takes first 5 shlokas of Mantra Ramayana to narrate the entire Rama story. Nilakantha takes first 5 shlokas from Rigveda 1090, Mandala 10, Sukta 90, first 5 suktas, he takes them and he explains the whole Ramakatha using these 5 Vedic mantras. And how he does this is extremely complicated, and we don't have time to that. But one example, for instance, this sukta says, refers to a Rishi whose name is Vamra, and Nilakantha explains, identifies this Vamra Rishi with Valmiki. And then in the next 4 sutras, he develops the basic Rama story of that Valmiki provides us. So using these first 5 shlokas, Nilakantha is able to retell Vedic roots or origins of Ramayana. That his purpose is to demonstrate how Ramayana, the story of Ram, is rooted in the Veda. And this may help us defend our tradition against Pollock's objection that Veda has only a Paramathika dimension, there is no Vyavahara dimension, meaning everyday life and purusharthas, and how is it possible that Vedic mantras could be providing us guidelines to purushartha, dharma, artha, kama and moksha, which are the purposes or the duties of every Hindu, every Indian person. So using Vedopa Brahmana, Nilakantha explained that Vedic worldview is open and flexible, not closed and fixed as proclaimed by Professor Pollock in his Vedicization theory, using this Vedopa Brahmana process. So by way of conclusion, I will suggest that itihāsa inculcates awareness of the Vedic roots of Indic cultural, social and spiritual world, Veda Mulakatvam, among Indians. That itihāsa nurse the Veda Mula to Veda Vriksha like a Kalpa Vriksha, laden with fruits of dharma, artha, kama and moksha, purusharthas. And that Valmiki initiated itihāsa Sankalan, which process Nilakantha and others have continued using hermeneutical principles developed in the tradition of Mimamsa. So that I think we can use against Professor Pollock, that Veda has no relevance, Veda has no history, Veda has no Vyavahara material dimension, and that Veda is closed, that there is no continuity. But we can see the example of Nilakantha and other scholars even today, that it is possible to reconnect with Veda and make their teachings available to everyday Indians even for today. And I think I will stop at this and let us have the questions and comments.
Can you, so as someone who's sort of had a career in the Western academia, yes, can you throw light on the fundamentally political nature of history compared to the, let's say, foundationally apolitical nature of itihāsa? Can you comment on it?
I think, as we said, itihāsa is a broader inclusive category, and it definitely includes what we may understand as a political dimension in the form of, say, Rajaniti, that ethical teaching, so political process informed by and tempered by, conditioned by niti. Rajaniti. I think there was a discussion yesterday, Prabhutva, Raja, using politics as power, and politics tempered by niti or ethics. And I think there are instances of Indian rulers, kings, they were taught select portions from the Ramayana and Mahabharata to motivate them to defend dharma. So that is where I think the political element comes, and it is integral to itihāsa. It is there, but it is not separated from the paramartha and ethical moral dimension.
So what I want,
sheer force of power.
No, what I want you to your opinion on the fundamental or political nature of Western history writing. Is it true or not? So what is the niti in Western history writing is what I want to know. I want to flip the question around.
I think that is beyond the present today's paper, and perhaps we can discuss it later on.
So I found your presentation very interesting. Now, in your presentation, you talk about something called as apaurushaya itihāsa and paurushaya itihāsa. Now, from my understanding, there is an objection on the apaurushayatva of the Vedas based that they have human authors. And the answer given over there that they are generally posts of certain people and they are not particular names. So what you have introduced as Paurushaya Itihasa, doesn't this go against the answer given to the objector, and does it not reinforce the objector's view?
No, because when we say Paurushaya, it means based on Purusha, and Purusha, whether man or woman, is an inclusive term, artha. That what is the purpose of Purusha? There are four: dharma, artha, kama and moksha. And the purpose of, say, performing a yajna is to make dharma manifest. And through dharma, then we learn about artha and kama and moksha. So I think there is an inherent connection between Mimamsa, the Vedic tradition, that when you perform yajna, you also give manifestation to dharma which remains unmanifest. But through the process of yajna, it becomes manifest. It's called dharma abhivakti.
So, in short, your answer is that it is mostly the recontextualization of the eternal Vedic truths with the application of Mimamsa
Yes.
onto a particular place.
Yes.
So-
Recontextualization or extension, expansion
So-
of meaning that is preserved and recorded in root or seed form in Vedic texts.
Okay, okay. So that
To
means
expand them.
still the Siddhanta will stand in spite of you introducing the Apaurushaya itihāsa.
Yes, because Apaurushaya itihasa is meant for that Apaurushaya dimension mantras in the Veda.
Okay, okay.
But we say they are providing genealogies of Rishis and Devatas and explaining the Samvada Suktas and so on. So that dimension is there, but it is only for the sake of the Vedic text. And then when we come to the Purusha or ordinary everyday Hindu human being, then we have the Paurushaya dimension. The
So-
two are connected through Mimamsa, hermeneutical principles of Linga, Prakarana, Atidesh and Vakya and so on.
So then one question still remains that the Rishis' names which are mentioned in the Vedas.
Yes.
Now, is the Rishi name mentioned over there, is it a post of the Rishi or is it a particular name of the Rishi?
It is the name of the Rishi, but it is, as they say, is cyclical, it continues and it will be reborn and appear in the next yuga.
Okay.
Whereas the human beings, they are limited to one particular yuga and their dimension is both cyclical and linear. But the Rishis and the Vedic dimension is cyclical because they keep on repeating. That is why they are not Paurushaya Itihas, they are Apaurushaya.
So because they are connected with the Rishis which are cyclical in nature, it is called Apaurushaya itihāsa. So
That is what I am suggesting. I have not seen that being discussed.
no, but it's a new
the
innovation.
scholars-
It's a nice innovation you have made because it's an answer.
That is the purpose of conferences, to put forward some theory, and if it is acceptable, it's okay. Otherwise, we can reject it.
Because it's an answer both to Pollock's objection of keeping it within the Vedic terms, and at the same point of time, you are preserving the Siddhanta of these rishis being certain posts. Okay. Thank you very much.
This is also related to the same, the Purushaya and Purushaya. We at least we have another one model in another culture. Like in Australian Aborigines, you have the dream time and the historical time, and whenever they have their narratives, they synchronize both of these. And they have been able also to, first of course the Westerners discredited, and then now it has been found that they were the originators of agriculture and all kind of secular sciences. And are we in a position then to provide a framework to study the Aboriginal cultures, a Vedic alternative or a Vedic system to study the other Aboriginal cultures that have been destroyed by the Western civilization or misinterpreted by the Western civilization?
Yes, I think it is possible. It's very interesting scope and possibility. There is a principle called Atidesh in Mimamsa where we can extend explanatory system from one field to another. For instance, in Vedic tradition, there are methods of performing a given yajna in certain, for certain yajnas, very comprehensive and in detail. So we call it Prakriti. And then if procedure or method for performing some other lesser known yajna is not known, then we can extend this principle already known to unknown category, we call it Vikruti. So I think that mechanism is already there in the Mimamsa and Indic tradition to extend and apply these procedures to other uninvestigated areas. That is a fascinating possibility we must explore.
Just one or 2 points. Just now you mentioned Prakriti Yaga and Vikruti Yaga. If all the angas of a yaga are mentioned, it is called a Prakriti Yaga. Darshaponamasabhyam Swargakamo Yajata. If only some Suryaya, Agnaye, etc., only some constituents of the yaga are mentioned, but the rest are to be borrowed from other Prakriti yaga. That is called a Vikruti yaga. This is clearly mentioned in Mimamsa, one thing. The second thing is when you refer to purushartha and that paramartha, this thing, dharma, actually this issue is discussed, I think, in first adhyaya of Dwadasha Lakshani, that is Mimamsa. So since the purusharthas are the main, goal of this Vedic literature, when you take into two parts, first karma bhaga, that is mantra brahmana, and then Upanishad bhaga of jnana. So through karma also jnana can be attained, or directly also jnana can be attained. When you said paurushaya and apaurushaya, as some scholar opined, it may lead to some misconception, misunderstanding. Please be careful. If you say apaurushaya, it has, as you said, emanated from the four mouths of Brahman, as it is said in Upanishad, Mahato Bhotasya Nishvasitam, Rigvedaha, Yajurvedaha, etc. And later, the rishis, 1137 branches of Veda are there. 1000 branches for Samveda only. These things are clearly mentioned in Mahabhashyam and other works. So when the mantra Shabda is Nitya, when you pronounce a Shabda, that will be there. That's why you can hear news from America, etc. also. If Shabda is Anitya, this would have not happened. So now the Vedas are there, but the rishis like Vasishtham Sama, they say, but Drishtam Sama is Panini Sutram. Drishtam means actually all the Indriyas can do all the things according to Vedic. So they, through the tapashakti and the yogi praksham, they listen to the mantras and propagate those mantras in the world for the benefit of people. So mantra drashtaraha they are called. So that is apaurushaya only. Artha is permanent, whereas the shabdanupurvi is done by the rishis again and again after each kalpa. After the pralaya is over and again the creation starts, then rishis will do their job. So it is apaurushaya only. Itihasas, Bharata, Ramayana, etc. are paurushaya. Thank you.
You brought about Pollock's approach as a epic and ours is emic, outsider's perspective and insider's perspective. Some people argue that because emic is in insider's perspective, it is more prone to bias. So the outsider's perspective is anyway superior to the insider's perspective because it is apart from bias. That is, some people argue. What is your response to that? Thank you.
Good question. What happens in practice is that these are two categories to start with, insider and outsider. Now, when we say insider and outsider, the reference is to an attitude of mind or approach, not physical. For instance, Professor Elstier follows or understands the emic or insider's approach. So you don't have to be necessarily born in India to explain or display an emic approach, an insider's approach. And many Indians, they may be born in India, but they may not be familiar with what the traditional approach is. So these are flexible categories, they are not rigid. And in practice, we should always welcome whatever is available from other sources. Even if it is from outside. In Ayurveda, for instance, he says that this process of research and expansion continues forever, and we should always be willing and ready to accept whatever comes from the outside sources. But our starting point and main focus should be from within the tradition, and we should not be swept off, as Mahatma Gandhi said, that we should open the windows, but we should take care that we are not swept off our feet. So for that we need a solidly based approach from within the tradition.
I wouldn't say it is exactly a question, sir. I wanted to comment on the way we normally address dharma, artha, kama, moksha. We often say it is the purpose of the Vedas or it is the purpose of the text. But in my understanding, I think it's much better to take them as the purpose of life, what is important to everyone's life. And I have not seen it said in any text that the purpose of the text was dharma, artha, kama, moksha. The reason I'm taking your time to say this is I think it gives a picture to the West that these are concocted Indian values which are, very peculiar orthodox concepts that have to be artificially understood and accepted or argued for or against. I don't think so. I think dharma, artha, kama, moksha is something not a single human being can do without. artha, we need money for anything you want to do, you need the arrangements, it's the economic arrangements. And dharma are the rules of the institution. If I am to come to this seminar and participate, I have to organize my ticket and I have to play by the rules. I have to register, and I mean, I can't hold this mic and stand in the garden and say anything. Nobody is going to tolerate that. That is dharma. I mean, you follow the rules of the system that you are participating in. Dharma, artha, kama. Kama is preference. I prefer to speak in a particular section and I may not be competent to speak in some other section. And if you ask me to come up there and speak on Ramayana or something, I simply wouldn't be able to. I have chosen a certain section and that is my kama. That is my preference. I feel the West often translates kama as desire and desire is bad. I'm sorry, that is not what it means. It means only what you prefer. And if you want to do something within your dharma and artha arrangements, and who is there to stop you? Pravrittasya ko varahita, you know. The moksha is the stress that we all talk about. I mean, if you have dharma, artha and kama, I hope you are without stress. So that is the moksha. And when we take these concepts to a higher level, I mean, I teach youngsters, I teach them about their school admissions and college admissions and their parents paying their fees, and then they're choosing the course and not being forced into a course they don't want to do. And dharma, artha, kama is satisfied. And then sometimes they are upset, they're depressed, they feel hassled, they feel a teacher hates them and they feel persecuted. So you feel free, so that is moksha. And when we get older and we address more serious issues in life, they take on a different meaning. And I tell my students, the Veda is not going to tell you to choose the subject, whether you want to study history or statistics. It's not going to tell you, have your lunch when you're hungry. It's not going to tell you these things. So our philosophy will tell you what we cannot answer ourselves. So I'm sorry for so much time. But I like to take a very simple, practical view of these issues and not make them artificially constructed values. And then we have Pollock and we have his arguments and we have our... It's such a waste of our lives, really.
All right, let us take this into account and...
Professor Tilak, do you agree?
I agree with the caution that she has articulated, and we should keep this in mind. Yes, there is we should not take them as artificial goals to be brought in from outside, but they are, as if we are through samskara, we have already internalized and cultivate them and bring them out rather than absorb them from outside.
Quick summary. So we heard, a very insider analysis of the terminology relating to itihasa and partly correcting the outsider views of Sheldon Pollock. Though I must say that you are too modest as insiders. You see, India is bad at history and so on, they all say that. And, in terms of chronology, it's a bit poor. In Chinese history, from about 800 before Christ, every major event is known to the day. And in India, major writers like Kalidasa, are not even known in terms of centuries, So in that sense, it is a bit defective, but in another sense, it's amazingly good. You see, the Puranic king lists, they are a very important source of information. And the fact that the different versions in different Puranas, in the Mahabharata, parts of it in the Vedas, in the Upanishads, are a little bit different, but not much. That is a guarantee for their authenticity. If they had all gotten together, Yajnavalkya and the Buddha and everyone across centuries and across the length and breadth of India and concocted a big conspiracy to fool the Indologists 3,000 years later, then they would all have written the same thing. But you see, it's not like that. And, that's a testimony of credibility. And so, thanks to those king lists, we can go back to even beyond the Vedas. The history of Manu, of Ila, of Pururavas, and so on. That is even beyond the Vedas. That is thousands of years BC. You see, so that is exceptionally good. So, part of it is defective, part of it is very good. Then, as for Dr. Murli, These details about caste genetics were new to me. In the Aryan invasion debate, genetics has limited value because, of course, people, whatever their genes, can always change language. From genes, you cannot deduce what language they spoke. But in terms of caste sociology, it is extremely important. So you have opened a new field here. And then the most practical thing when you go on the streets and you have to discuss politics with people who don't know anything about these abstruse matters of Mimamsa and itihāsa and so on. What they do usually know is that Dr. Ambedkar was anti-Hindu and anti-caste and anti-the Aryans and pro the natives who are the lower castes, the depressed classes, as Churchill said. And in fact, you have shown, by the way, it was not your main thesis, but it just appeared so clearly, by the way, that he was, in secularist terms, a Hindu fanatic.